Tonight, we must discuss a development that has sent shockwaves across the Middle East and the world. Israel is in panic. A massive and coordinated strike from Yemen has reportedly hit deep into Tel Aviv, the very heart of Israel's economic and political center. This is not a small incident, nor is it an isolated one. It is the latest chapter in a rapidly escalating regional crisis, one that exposes the deep fractures in global politics, military dependence, and economic power. Tel Aviv was thrown into chaos late last night as Yemen launched what experts are calling one of the most audacious and unexpected strikes in the modern history of Middle Eastern warfare. The attack unfolded in multiple waves, combining ballistic missiles and advanced drones aimed at critical military and infrastructure targets across central Israel. Residents of Tel Aviv were jolted awake by the piercing sound of air raid sirens, followed by a series of explosions that lit up the night sky. For a city long considered the heartbeat of Israel's power and modernity, this was a moment of sheer disbelief, a chilling reminder that even the most fortified nations are not beyond reach. Witnesses described scenes of panic as civilians rushed to underground shelters while defense systems scrambled to intercept incoming fire. The Israeli Iron Dome, typically touted as nearly impenetrable, faced an overwhelming challenge as simultaneous projectiles targeted multiple locations. Defense officials confirmed that several missiles managed to breach interception lines, causing localized damage and triggering power outages across parts of Tel Aviv. The psychological shock, however, may prove far more lasting than the physical impact. The notion that a nation under siege for years, Yemen, could project power deep into Israel's most protected urban core has reshaped perceptions across the region overnight. The timing of the strike raises even deeper questions. Coming amid Israel's ongoing regional tensions and growing international scrutiny, Yemen's move appears to have been meticulously calculated to expose vulnerabilities. Military analysts have called this attack a strategic wake-up call, a demonstration that the geography of security has changed. No longer confined to border skirmishes or drone skirmishes over the Red Sea, this was a direct hit on the nerve center of Israel's military and economic command. In Tel Aviv, scenes of confusion and fear mixed with disbelief. Social media was flooded with footage of glowing trails in the sky, emergency sirens, and the thunder of missile interceptions overhead. For the first time in years, Israelis experienced the kind of vulnerability often felt by civilians in Gaza, Yemen, and Lebanon. The event has become a symbolic reversal. The powerful suddenly on the defensive. This unprecedented attack has not only shaken Israel's military establishment, but also challenged its long-standing image of unassailable strength. What was once unimaginable is now real. Tel Aviv, the city that never sleeps, was forced into darkness. And that image alone will haunt Israeli and Western policymakers for years to come. Panic gripped Israel as the full scale of Yemen's unexpected assault came into view. Within minutes of the first explosions over Tel Aviv, the Israeli government declared a nationwide state of emergency. Sirens wailed through the streets, defense forces scrambled to assess the damage, and live broadcast showed scenes of chaos unfolding in real time. The shock was not only in the physical destruction, but in the psychological blow it delivered to a nation that has long prided itself on being impenetrable. For the first time in decades, the heart of Israel felt truly vulnerable. The sense of invincibility, so deeply embedded in its national consciousness, was suddenly and brutally shaken. Across Israeli cities, fear spread faster than official updates could contain it. Panic buying erupted in supermarkets. Traffic jams clogged highways as families fled toward rural shelters, and communication networks were briefly overwhelmed by the surge of emergency calls. The government's public reassurances, urging calm and promising retaliation, did little to quiet the growing anxiety. On social media, hashtags like Fay Tel Aviv under attack and Fight Israel in panic trended globally within minutes, amplifying the perception that this was not just another regional clash, it was a national crisis. The scenes of frightened civilians rushing into underground bunkers painted a stark contrast to the confident, militarized image Israel projects to the world. The Israeli Defense Forces faced mounting pressure as it became clear that even with advanced technology and decades of intelligence experience, the system had been caught off guard. Analysts on live television questioned how a country with one of the most sophisticated defense infrastructures in the world could be blindsided by a strike from Yemen, a nation battered by years of war and blockade. This contradiction became the central talking point in both local and international media. Was this a temporary lapse or the beginning of a new, more dangerous chapter in Middle Eastern warfare? The panic was not limited to the public. Inside the halls of power, there was confusion and urgency. Emergency meetings were called in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, with officials rushing to coordinate with U.S. and European allies. The sudden vulnerability ignited fears of a broader regional escalation, with military strategists warning that Israel could now be exposed to multi-front attacks. The sense of security that once defined Israeli life was replaced overnight with a tense uncertainty. The panic was no longer just on the streets. It had seeped into the corridors of power. In the wake of the Yemeni strike on Tel Aviv, Israel's immediate call for U.S. assistance revealed the depth of its dependence on Washington's military and political umbrella. Within hours of the first explosions, Israeli officials made urgent communications with the Pentagon and the White House, requesting additional defense interceptors, intelligence coordination, and diplomatic support at the United Nations. The world watched as Israel, often seen as one of the most technologically advanced military powers, found itself reaching out for help, its confidence rattled, and its security doctrine under question. The image of an unshakable fortress was replaced by one of urgent vulnerability. It was a moment that laid bare a geopolitical truth long whispered in policy circles. Israel's strength, for all its sophistication, still rests heavily on American backing. This plea for help sent ripples across the global stage. For Washington, it was both familiar and alarming. The United States has long been Israel's closest ally, providing billions in aid, weaponry, and political cover. But this time, the request carried a new undertone, one of desperation rather than coordination. The Biden administration was suddenly thrust into a delicate balancing act, weighing its unconditional support for Israel against the growing fatigue of American involvement in foreign conflicts. As Yemen celebrated what it called a defensive retaliation, U.S. officials found themselves scrambling to contain a situation that threatened to spiral into a regional confrontation. Behind closed doors, intelligence briefings painted a sobering picture. The scale and precision of Yemen's strike suggested a new level of capability, possibly aided by external actors, raising concerns in Washington about the evolving balance of power in the Middle East. For the U.S., this was not just about defending an ally. It was about preserving credibility in a region increasingly testing American influence. Every missile fired at Tel Aviv echoed in the halls of the Pentagon as a reminder that the post-Cold War order in the Middle East is shifting and fast. In Israel, the request for U.S. assistance was seen as both a necessity and an embarrassment. Opposition leaders question how a nation that prides itself on military dominance could be so dependent on foreign intervention when crisis struck. The public, too, was divided. Some saw America's support as reassurance, while others viewed it as proof that Israel's self-reliance had eroded. The once unquestioned narrative of control had cracked, exposing the uneasy reality beneath the surface. For both nations, this moment was more than an act of alliance. It was a test of how much longer power can be sustained through dependency rather than resilience. Yemen's strike on Tel Aviv was not merely a display of military strength. It was a declaration of intent, a bold and defiant message to the world that Yemen would no longer be confined to the role of victim in the geopolitical theater of the Middle East. For years, the country had been reduced to headlines about famine, bombings, and humanitarian catastrophe, often portrayed as a nation too broken to rise. But on this night, Yemen flipped the script. The roar of its missiles cutting through the skies over Tel Aviv carried more than explosives. It carried symbolism, a message of resistance from a nation long written off by the global powers that sought to dominate it. The timing of the attack was no coincidence. With regional tensions at a breaking point and global attention fixed elsewhere, Yemen's move was calculated to demand recognition. It told the world that those once seen as powerless can still change the course of history. This was not a random act of aggression. It was a political statement forged through years of suffering and survival. In the words of one Yemeni analyst, when the world ignored our cries, we decided to make the world listen. That sentiment echoed across Arab media, framing the strike not only as retaliation but as redemption, a moment of reclaiming agency in a region long overshadowed by the dominance of Western-backed powers. International observers were quick to note the sophistication of the operation. The coordination, precision, and impact of the attack demonstrated an evolution in Yemen's military strategy. Despite a decade of war, blockades, and bombardments, the country's resistance forces had managed to adapt and develop capabilities that few believed possible. This transformation sent shockwaves through intelligence communities, forcing many to reconsider their assumptions about Yemen's limits. What had once been dismissed as a fractured, war-torn state now stood as a potent reminder of what desperation and determination can achieve when survival becomes the only option. Across the Middle East, Yemen's strike resonated as more than just a headline. It became a symbol of defiance. From Beirut to Baghdad, the message was clear: smaller nations, long subjugated and dismissed, are finding their voices again. And in a world where power is increasingly challenged from the ground up, Yemen's act served as both warning and inspiration, a signal that the balance of fear is beginning to shift and that even the most marginalized can make the mightiest tremble. The economic and political aftershocks of Yemen's strike on Tel Aviv reverberated far beyond the Middle East. Within hours of the attack, global markets began to react. Oil prices surged to their highest levels in months as traders braced for the possibility of an extended regional conflict. Energy analysts warned that any disruption in shipping lanes through the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden could send prices skyrocketing worldwide, placing even greater strain on economies already grappling with inflation. The attack was not just a military event, it was a geopolitical tremor with financial ripples stretching from Riyadh to Washington, from London to Beijing. Every explosion over Tel Aviv was mirrored by a spike in global anxiety, and the uncertainty sent investors scrambling for safe havens. For Israel, the immediate economic toll was severe. Trading on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange was briefly halted as defense, tourism, and technology sectors took heavy losses. Foreign investors began reassessing their exposure, and local businesses shuttered temporarily amid fears of further escalation. The cost of emergency defense mobilization, estimated in the billions, threatened to drain state resources at a time when social unrest and political divisions were already testing the government's stability. The image of Israel as a safe, economically resilient hub was suddenly in question, replaced by a growing sense of fragility. In Washington, policymakers faced a difficult dilemma. Supporting Israel militarily meant further financial commitments, additional arms shipments, and greater involvement in yet another foreign crisis. Economists warned that sustained engagement would fuel budgetary pressures at home, potentially diverting resources from domestic recovery efforts. The American public, wary of endless wars and rising living costs, began voicing skepticism about pouring billions into overseas conflicts. The political cost of unwavering support for Israel was rising, and fast. Meanwhile, Yemen's move was being framed across parts of the global south as a symbolic strike against economic and political inequality. Commentators in Asia, Africa, and Latin America pointed to the attack as evidence of shifting power dynamics where nations once dismissed as powerless are now capable of influencing global markets and headlines. The balance of economic influence long controlled by Western powers, appeared to be facing a new kind of challenge, one not waged through boardrooms or trade deals, but through missiles and defiance. The world was reminded that in a globalized system, even a single act of resistance can send shockwaves through the world economy, and that the age of unchallenged dominance may be nearing its end. The Yemeni strike on Tel Aviv marked more than a single act of defiance. It signaled a profound shift in the balance of power across the Middle East. For decades, Israel has maintained a strategic dominance in the region, backed by American technology, intelligence, and financial support. Its military superiority was rarely questioned, and its deterrence capability stood as a cornerstone of regional stability. But in one night, that perception began to crack. The attack from Yemen, a nation ravaged by years of conflict, isolation, and poverty, sent a chilling message that power in the modern Middle East is no longer defined solely by wealth or alliances. The rules of engagement have changed, and so have the players capable of shaping them. This event has reshaped regional psychology. Countries that once feared Israeli retaliation are now watching closely, calculating how the new vulnerabilities exposed by Yemen's assault could alter future strategies. The myth of Israel's invulnerability, carefully built over decades, was dealt a symbolic blow. For the first time, smaller actors, from resistance movements to embattled states, see evidence that even the most fortified power can be reached. It is this psychological shift, not the physical damage, that may ultimately prove most destabilizing. The attack did not simply strike Israel's infrastructure, it struck at its aura of control, and that aura is what long kept potential challengers in check. In capitals across the region, military planners are rethinking their assumptions. Iran, Lebanon, Syria, and others are studying the implications carefully, recognizing that the Yemeni model, decentralized, unpredictable, and strategically precise, could redefine modern warfare. Traditional hierarchies of power, once determined by conventional armies and air superiority, are being replaced by asymmetric strategies that rely on technology, endurance, and ideological resolve. The battlefield is evolving, and with it, the old order of deterrence is eroding. Globally, the attack is forcing Western policymakers to confront a reality they have long ignored. The age of unilateral control is ending. The emerging world order is not one of clear superpowers, but of shifting, unpredictable alliances and empowered non-state actors. Yemen's assault became more than a regional provocation. It became a symbol of transformation. The unthinkable had happened, and in doing so, it opened a new chapter in Middle Eastern politics, one where fear no longer flows in one direction, and where even the smallest nation can change the course of history with a single calculated strike.